Hi there. I'm doing some veneering today, and I thought it might be of interest to people, sort of the process and the products. And I mean, this is kind of veneering applicable to cabinet makers. Like how you go about it, and just what you might use to do it. So first step that we're going to do here is we're going to mix up the adhesive that we're going to use to bond the veneer to the substrate. And in this case, the veneer is 1.5 mil European oak, and the substrate is 18mm Finsa hydrofugo, which is a kind of moisture-resistant MDF. It's quite dense, and then that's been lipped all around with 14mm thick oak clippings. They will get trimmed down smaller than that, but I oversize them for the initial blank. So this is the adhesive itself. This is a UF resin, and this one's made by a company called Eureka, which seems to be the one most people in the UK use. And so what we've got is we've got three components to this adhesive. We've got the resin itself, we have a hardener, and we have a filler. So the resin is what the resin is, it's a glue. The hardener is what sets it off. It's a chemical reaction to set it off, and you can get different types of hardener. So what I'm using here is a winter hardener, and then what that means is that will go off faster at lower temperatures. You can get summer hardeners, which the setting time's slower, and also the pot life's longer on those. So with this stuff, if it's warmish, which I've got the heating on in here, I've only got it to about 16 degrees because I don't want to get too warm and make it too stressful. But once it starts to go, it goes quick. So when you've got it in your roller, having that summer one, it gives you a chance to roll out a bit more. I mean, I'm not in too bad a situation with these particular doors. The reason these doors are being done in a vac bag is because they are 20mm too long to go in the press that I made. I expected I'd never need anything longer than that. They're 8-foot doors, which I never normally make, but these are to fit an existing opening, so I couldn't design around that. And so what we've got now is we've got these doors that won't fit. So these are being done in a vac bag, sort of like the way I would have done things before I made the press. But yeah, so they're 20mm too long, which is like 3/4 of an inch. So sod's law, you're always going to end up just that little bit too small. But we're going to get this mixed up now. So we're adding 15% hardener by weight. Got a set of nice accurate digital scales here. And I'll add probably about 10% filler. Now, I probably don't need the filler with 1.5. The purpose of the filler is it makes the glue thicker, which when you're using 0.6 mil veneer, thinner veneers, especially stuff with quite open pores, it reduces the tendency for it to seep through. And you can add more to it. Now, I'll add a little bit just because I prefer the glue a little bit thicker. I'm just used to working with a filler, and so I find it a little bit easier to work with. But I'm only going to add maybe 10% by weight. I'm probably going to mix up about 350 grams of resin here. There probably is a proper calculation per square meter and stuff, but I just know that that's about right just by looking at it. And I'm going to get that mixed up now. I'm going to use some little mixing cups. And I've got a drill here with a bent bit of wiring that I use for whisking it up after I've done the initial stirring. So I'm just going to get some gloves on and get that mixed up now. And we'll fast forward through that and we'll go to the next stage. So literally, you can see me just mixed up here. This video is just about the gluing on. So if you've got any questions about jointing the veneers or anything, just pop them below and I'll try and answer them. I'll just mix this in the bucket, stop any splashing here. Right, so that's got that glue mixed up. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to fill the hopper on this roller, and this is what we're going to use to apply the glue to the blanket itself. So this roller is just a cheap one off of eBay or Amazon. You can get them. They're generic Chinese rollers. They're very similar to the Pizzy rollers, or I think Foal or Foul. I don't know how you say it. PH. It's a weird German spelling, but like those rollers are like, I don't know, 250 quid, something like that. These are about £20. They're almost disposable prices. That's how cheap they are. But I've had this one for ages. I bought two at the time thinking that they wouldn't last. It's been fantastic, really good. I find it really easy to clean up. I've used the more expensive Pizzy rollers as well, and I actually think this is just as good. And so does my friend who's got the Pizzy roller. He said that it seems as good. So I think these are a great buy. It comes with a little cradle for holding it when you're filling it up with glue, which is quite useful. Yeah, just these are a good little purchase, and you can get them in various widths depending what you're doing. I'm going to use my wide one here because I'm doing like a relatively large door blank. But if you're just doing narrow parts, you can use a narrow version. So we'll get this glue poured in. You can see it's quite thick, and has got some filler in there to thicken it out. And when we get this applied, we're going to try and get this as evenly applied across the substrate as we can. We're basically looking to have the whole thing looking wet. Now, we're using 1.5 mil veneer, as I said before, and that's far more forgiving in terms of the amount of glue you put on. You can get away with really slathering it on. Now, if you're doing 0.6 and especially open grained veneers, you've got to be a lot more careful about how thick you're applying that glue, because what you don't want to do is get some pressure on it and all that glue just squeeze straight through the veneer. I mean, this glue itself is like a greyish colour, so you would see it. You can add pigments into the glue. So say you was veneering with something, I don't know, say you was veneering with like ebony, and you wanted to make sure if any glue come through, if there is any opening on the seams or anything that it wasn't seen, you could pigment the glue black. But we've not got tons of pot life on this, so I'm going to get the camera turned around and we'll get this glue rolled out, and that'll be the next step. Right, so this is our blank. We just got it on a pair of sawhorses. We've dusted it down, made sure it's nice and clean, and now we're going to apply the glue to it. And you can see this is the 14mm lipping all around the openings, and you can also see I've got some inlaid oak here for some V-groove details that are going to get routed into the door after it's veneered. So they're there so that when you route through and the veneer, you don't see any of the MDF core underneath it. So we'll get this glue laid out across these and get it rolled out. Now, it's quite thick. It does take a little bit of working, but what I tend to try and do is just get glue kind of roughly over the whole thing. And then when you pull the trigger on these kind of rollers, it disengages the hopper so that you're just rolling it. It just becomes like a standard roller, you know, like a gloss roller or something that you'd use for rolling paint normally. It stops the hopper from releasing any more glue. So I try and get a bit out. I'm not worried about getting it really even as such. I'm just trying to make sure that there's glue everywhere that I can then come back and work quite well with the roller and really work it around to make sure we're getting nice even coverage. What you want, absolutely don't want, is any dry spots, you know, because if you've got any dry spots, they're obviously gonna not bond. So it's important to make sure that you've got glue everywhere. And because it's thick, you will get to a point where it feels like you've run out of glue, but you haven't. If you give it a minute, it will just kind of like go back down the hopper, seep back down again. So now I've got the hopper disengaged, and I'm just going to work this glue around, paying particular attention to corners, edges and lippings, because they're the bits which are going to pull if anywhere's going to pull. So you want to make sure that the around your openings is really well glued. Make sure you're getting glue right up to the very edge. You don't want any, you know, like if this was a sandwich you were making, you want to be paying some real attention to buttering right up to the crust. You want to really make sure this is glued well on the edge. And it doesn't matter if you get a bit of overlap. You know, if a little bit drips down, that's not going to make any real difference whatsoever. If you notice any dry spots, you can add a bit more glue again. And you can see we're getting like a fairly nice even consistency and texture to this. Now as you roll it, it's going to look white as it lifts the glue, and then as it settles out, it's going to go back to being clearish looking. And I'm looking for like a uniform wet sheen to everything. There's a lot of work that's gone into these doors up to this point before you've even put the veneer on. You know, cutting these blanks out, doing all the lipping. That all needs flush trimming. Then these have all been through the wide belt sander to get them absolutely flat and smooth so that they're ready for veneering over. So what you really don't want to do is waste all that work by not having a good layer of glue on everything. So spending a little bit of extra time at this point to really make sure you've glued well is probably a good investment of your time, really. Right, I think that is fairly well covered at this point. Just going around all my openings again, making sure that I haven't missed anywhere. And I say, with it being 1.5, although it's a bit more brittle to use generally than the 0.6, I would say for a beginner it's probably more forgiving because you don't have to worry about that seep through as much. Plus it's got the added benefit, it's very easy to sand because you've got, you know, 1.5mm, which I'm not sure what that is in imperial, but I don't know. It's probably 3/64 of an inch or something like that. So you've got a bit of you've got a bit of thickness to work with. Now I've got some little sticks here. These are just 8mm by 8mm square sections. I'm going to pop these on. Now, I work by myself, so moving big veneer layups like this can be quite tricky on your own. And just putting these sticks on just gives you an opportunity to get the veneer somewhere near where you want it without having to like try and shuffle it across the glue and scrape it over the glue. So we're going to get this. I've got to always make sure that the veneer is right next to where I'm working. I've got this adjustable height bench next to me. And now that we've got that on there, we can get it somewhat lined up before we start removing the sticks. Now, you see the diamond pattern. I don't know if it comes across on the camera, but up this middle seam of tape where the central seam is of this veneer, we've got a line drawn. And that's because these veneers are a perfect book match. So these are two sequential veneers from a pack of veneer that we've flipped like the pages of a book to get a mirror image. Now, if this was just square openings, if it was a millimetre or two off centre, you're not going to notice it. But with this being diamond openings, it becomes super obvious because the point of the diamond obviously really clearly determines the centre point of the door. And what you wanted to make sure is that that seam is running absolutely perfectly down the centre. So I've drawn this line over the seam so I know exactly where that seam is. And then I've also got on the end of the doors a little tick mark to show me where the centre of the door is, where the centre of those diamonds are. So that's that one. And that's that one. Now what I'm going to do now is just grab some tape, and you notice I've got everything around me ready before I even start with these jobs, because say your pot life is quite reasonable. I mean, you've probably got 40 minutes, but that can soon go if you start getting stressed out. So once I've got the veneer in the right spot, I'm just going to pop a couple of little bits of tape on, and all they're doing is just making sure that veneer is not going to move off centre for me. I'll go along the seam. Now you can feel the dips underneath. I just want to make sure the seam hasn't come apart at all. Sometimes you can get a little step in the seam when you move it, especially on this 1.5mm. And just making sure that step hasn't formed, and we seem pretty good. We'll get a bit of tape this end as well. Again, just to make sure that the veneer's not going to move. And you can see now that's pretty well centered and pretty well down. I'm just going to make sure that it's kind of veneered, pushing out from the middle a little bit, just to make sure that there's no big air bubbles that are going to cause any cracks. And we'll just get that veneer kind of pushed down. And there is a bit of tack to this UF glue, so as you push it down, you will feel it kind of stick a bit. It's has got enough tack to it just to hold things. So there we go, we've got that there. Now, normally in my press, I would veneer both sides at once, and that is definitely the better way of doing it. You're making sure you're balancing the panel as you're gluing it. Unfortunately, these don't fit in my press. I'm working by myself. Getting these in the bag can be quite tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to veneer one side, and then as soon as it's gone off, I'm going to veneer the other side. So I'm not giving time for there to be any changes in acclimatization. I'm not giving it time to warp or move. I'm just going to make sure that the second that I've got it in, second I've got it out, I'm getting the other side glued up, and I'm going to get that veneered as well. So what I'm doing now is just putting this bit of MDF on the top, and let me just check I've got that the right way up. Yeah, I have. So this bit of MDF, all this is for is to help me flip this over, because I want this to be veneer side down in the bag, especially with those cutouts in the middle, because the bag's going to put pressure on those cutouts. You don't want it splitting the veneer. So by clamping it to this allows me to just, working by myself again, flip it over. Once we've got it there, we'll take the clamps off. We'll make sure that the seam hasn't moved again. So we'll just check those lines line up, which it does. And then we're just going to put a couple of bits of tape just to hold this backer board up tight to this, and then we can get this in the bag, get the vacuum pump running, and then we'll start to have a door. So let's just a little bit of tape here. You're not looking at loads, it's just literally enough. This piece of MDF that's underneath is just a 6mm piece of MDF. I have waxed the surface of it very thoroughly. So I've used some flooring wax and a buffing pad on a random orbital sander, and I've waxed it to within an inch of its life really well, so that if there's any glue squeeze out, it won't bond, because you really don't want to be trying to pick your veneer off. So now that we've got that there, I'll get this camera moved and we'll get this put into the bag. Right, so you can see the bag here. Now what I've done is I've already got this edge folded back to give me somewhere to rest the front edge of the door in. This is why I made the press, because this can be quite tricky by yourself, getting especially larger objects into the bag. But we've got a sawhorse where it's one of these Triton like roller stand trestle things, but they're actually really good. Triton stuff's generally a bit pony, but that's pretty decent. And we're just going to get the door balanced on the edge here, get it there, and then I can lift and make sure I can slide everything without it moving. So these are getting these are relatively heavy. I would imagine they're around 30 kilograms, which is 60 pounds-ish, is it something? So not unmanageable, but awkward to try and hold and mess around with that bag to try and get in. So once I've got that edge in there, and I know I'm not going to catch the bag, I can just start pushing it forwards and getting it into the bag itself. Now, sounds like we've got a delivery here. One sec, I'll just go grab that. Yeah, sorry about that. It was just a paint delivery arriving. So yeah, now I've got it in the bag. I'm going to double check my seams again, make sure that nothing looks like it's moved. So you don't need to be quite as careful if you haven't got something like that diamond pattern where it becomes really, really obvious, but just check that's good there and check that's good there. Now, this bag, I'm not actually going to use any breather membrane because the outlet's to the side of it, and I've got a platen board in here, which is just a nice flat board that's got a load of grooves cut in it. And so I don't actually need to use the breather fabric. Normally you use some fabric called breather fabric, which if say the inlet was here, you'd put it from there to the edges to make sure the air can be drawn out. But we just don't need that, so we're not bothering. So we're going to take this bag and I'll just fold it over here, get the sealing rods, and all these are basically is like a C-shaped piece of pipe and a round bit of pipe, and it just clamps the bag in there. And this bag and this pump and everything, I've actually borrowed from my friend John, so a massive thanks to him, because when I made my press, I used the pump and everything to make my press. And I did make it so you can remove it and use it, but it's a massive pain. So this has saved me a lot of hassle having to strip that down. So now that we've got that in, we want to make sure there's no creases, no folds. See, that'll drop down like this, and that's now sealed up, and we can get this vacuum pump switched on, and it'll start drawing air out. So this has got a few little pinprick holes in this, so I might try and have a listen out for them in a minute. And any little holes that we find, we can throw a bit of tape over. I think John's had this bag for quite a while, so it's got a few stretch marks in it where it's had some bigger bits in it. But it's, it's, as long as it can hold at least sort of 20 whatever of mercury, I can't remember what the measurement is, but basically it's sort of like 70% vacuum. Now I won't worry too much really, because the pump's got to stay on anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's leaking a little bit, as long as it's evacuating the air quicker than it's leaking in, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get a good vacuum seal. So yeah, just what this is actually being done on, we've got, if you might have seen in my old video from the other week, I made a massive bench top, which is what's underneath this, and it was made as a huge torsion box to be really, really flat. When I made the press, that was a torsion box. I made a lot of effort to make sure that was very flat, because when you glue up something, veneer something, you're essentially doing bent laminations. You're laminating parts together, especially with the UF glue. It's a very rigid glue line. And if you were to have this as a bowed bench and you glued your door up on it bowed, that door's going to be bowed forever. So it's really important this stays nice and flat. So what we're doing here is we'll make sure that this is a real nice flat. We've got this platen board on top of it. And this bench, was made primarily just for making these doors, because they wouldn't fit in the press. But you can see now the bag's starting to pull down tight, and we're starting to get some pretty good suction. It takes a little while for the pump to empty the bag out, and then once it empties, all of a sudden it seems to build up a lot of pressure quite quickly then. So it's just, waiting for that initial time. I'm going to just go around again, making sure that can't see anything that's lifting, the bag's not got pinched. We're just making sure that everything looks as it should look, which it appears to do. So what we're going to do now is this, what time is it now? I did go out and get some paint from a courier, which probably killed a few minutes, but I reckon this has probably had a pot life so far as about 30 minutes. At this temperature, I usually get maybe 40, 45 minutes before it starts to jelly up. So we've probably got 5 or 10 minutes left before this glue starts to grab. And then I'm going to leave this for a good hour. I'll probably nip and get some breakfast. Just leave the pump running and make sure that it's come. And then what I always do is the pot that I've mixed the glue in, I leave the mixing stick in there, leave it on the side. It's at the same temperature as what's in the bag. And you can tell how hard the glue is in your bag by checking the leftover glue in your pot. So I'm going to wait until that's gone just past the point where it's gel-like. I want it to be firm enough that it's quite difficult to break. And then once it's that firm, then I know that this is, although it's not fully set, when it's set, it goes like glass. It is a really rigid glue. Although it's not fully set, I'll know that it's set enough to allow me to flip over this, do the other side. And then what I also do is, before I glue the other side, I will flush trim out with a router these bits of veneer in the holes, because when I flip this over, they're going to be suspended in the air like a drum. And as that bag comes down, it'll put pressure on them and it'll split the veneer. Now, obviously, it doesn't matter about the bits in the holes, but those splits can run up into your door. And what we don't want to cause is like a splintered edge around the edge. So we'll trim them out first. So that's important to remember. If you're ever veneering something with openings, make sure that you're trimming that veneer. And that's another reason why I'm veneering this in 2 parts rather than both sides at once. Now, if you've got a heated press, that doesn't matter because it's only going to push flat. But if you've got a heated press, you're probably not watching this video because you're better at veneering than me, more than likely. So, you know, for people who are going to be doing this at home or in a small scale workshop like mine, you're more than likely going to be using a vac bag. And that's just something to be aware of. You know, it will conform to whatever's there. So if you have got areas that are suspended, it will cause damage. Right, so I'm going to leave this now. Hopefully that's been some use to you. I'll probably just put a little bit of footage of me flush trimming up one of the doors at the end to show you that bit of flush trimming. And then I'll do an update on these doors in a couple of weeks' time when I've been through the spray booth, showing how they look. Hopefully that's helpful. There's not a lot of info, especially like UK specific info for if you're looking for what products to use and stuff. So hopefully, you know, this will help out some people who are maybe wanting to dabble a bit with veneer and looking for some info on how to get started. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.